beautiful night in New York. There were 1,000 things going on, and you're all here, which warms the contents of my heart. We're going to do a brief presentation. Carolyn's going to speak, Alan's going to speak, I have something great to say. And then we're going to sit down and have a fantastic dinner. So with that, let me introduce our host and my friend, Carolyn. Thank you. And you guys, we've actually never had an event here before, so it fits. That's good to know. So this is going to start off depressing and then hopefully get slightly better. But think about what it's like to be you guys, to be Gen Z or Gen Alpha. And it's got to feel like the deck's rigged against you, right? And it is, right? So if you think about it, you live in a world online more than anything else, where all the economic incentives for all the platforms are to promote toxic content towards you because that generates more eyeballs and more clicks, which makes them more money. And because they can't be sued by you for anything that's on there, there's no accountability, there's no risk at all. They just run away with it, and all you're being fed is negative stuff. So that's why, like, Instagram has groups. So, these girls like cut themselves, without eating disorders, or whatever it is. I don't think it's something I'm really familiar with this. And so, one is the law is designed basically to force this type of content on you guys, and no one who's in power wants to change that because YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, whatever it is, like, they make money from the current system. They're not looking to change it. So that's one. The whole economic system of the internet's against you, right? And then number two, the entire political system is rigged against you, right? And so you guys are digital natives, right? You've never not lived online. Every single thing you do, right? Your schoolwork, your regular work, love life, banking, healthcare, whatever it is, right? It's all online. And you engage politically online, right? And you talk about stuff. But the analog version of it is finding a random voting place on a random Tuesday to vote an election for two people that you've never heard of, where your view is probably nothing's going to change anyway, so why even bother, right? So what happens? You guys don't really vote. What does that mean? You don't count politically, right? Which means we're never going to solve the really deep problems facing this country, climate change, immigration, guns, until your generation, which has, even across party lines, for really consistent views on this stuff, come together and actually get things done. And so to that end, and this is kind of why I'm getting involved in all of this, I spent the first part of my career working in government politics, city government, state government, federal government, kind of saw it from every angle and concluded one thing. Every policy output is the result of politics. Every politician makes every decision solely based on the next election, what that decision can have, and that's it, nothing else. And if you just accept them about it, if you say, okay, this is human nature, this is probably true in the Greek Senate, the Roman Senate, all of that, then what you need to generally do is figure out, how do I make what I want in their political interest, right? And right now, we live in a world where, because of gerrymandering, the only election that really matters is the primary, right? And primaries are not typically outside presidential elections, 10 to 15%. And so, who votes in those elections? Extremes or big special interests that can lose money in those elections, right? And so you guys, even though you have a voice that you do actually express quite a bit online, it doesn't really matter because you're not voting. Now imagine a world where you could vote on your phone instead, right? And you could vote securely and safely and confidentially online. Or you can vote every city council primary, every state senate primary. If you don't vote for Minnesota Black, right? Or take when Amazon wanted to put their second headquarters here in Queens, majority of the city wanted it. There's lots of really good high-paying jobs. No reason not to want it. Majority of the district wanted it, but the state senator of that district, Mike Generis, who's extremely powerful, he turned out his primary is 9%. That 9% are as far left as you get. They hate Jeff Bezos, they hate Amazon, and they would rather lose all of those jobs than see Amazon move into their neighborhood, right? And as a result, even though we're now down 300,000 jobs since COVID, and we could have used those jobs. We drove it away simply because primary turnout was so low. If in Mike Generis' primary turnout were 41% instead of 9%, overwhelmingly, he leads the charge to make this thing happen, right? So on both sides of the aisle, shit doesn't get done because the only people who participate are the extremes, and they just want more period, right? They don't care at all about actual results. None of that's going to change until you guys are in power. You guys are not going to vote at scale until you can do so on your phone. So we have created this thing a couple of years ago called the Mobile Voting Project. And in that, we started funding and running elections around the country. People have voted in real elections on their phone. So we sponsored elections now, meaning we paid for the actual jurisdiction's cost to administer the election in 7 states, 21 jurisdictions. We either deployed military, so soldiers who were abroad, or people with disabilities voted in real elections on their phones. All 21 times they were independently audited by the National Cybersecurity Center, all came back clean, turnout on average more than doubled. And the next step is we are about 5-6 really done building our own mobile voting technology. I put $10 million of my own money into doing it. And it will be free and open source to anybody who wants to use it. It will be far and away the most sophisticated, encrypted, verified voting tech ever built by a lot. And at that point, once the excuse goes away, then it gets tricky, right? Because all of a sudden, so I used to work for Chuck Schumer, who's the majority leader in the Senate, and I was Chuck's communications director, so I kind of know how he thinks pretty well. And if I went up to Chuck right now and said, Chuck, mobile voting, if it were to happen, would take these 25 things you report to care about, whether it's the Amazon jobs and Queens or the assault weapons ban, and make them more likely to happen, should we be for it? Do you know what he would say? I'm not making it easier for AOC to primary. And that's the only way he would think about this, and it would never happen, right? And Chuck's just typical of it, right? He's not particularly better or worse than the rest of them. This is what they are. And so they're going to come up with every excuse they possibly can to prevent this from happening. Because if you hold power now, you have no interest in making it easier for someone to disrupt your power and take it away from you. Which means the only way mobile voting is ever going to happen is if Gen Z and Gen Alpha lead the charge, and we build a movement, and we have our own Arab Spring here in the US, and we force the change, just like we've seen other movements like same-sex marriage do. It's hard, but it's doable. Once you do that, and mobile voting is legalized, then you guys are in a position to change everything, right? And it's never going to happen at scale unless that's the way it goes down. And so for me, the connectivity between all the ways that you guys are just getting fucked by the current system, right? Whether it's, all the economic and legal incentives that make the internet as toxic as possible and make you feel as bad about yourself as possible, or election system that's basically designed to exclude you from the process. Either way, that's got to get stopped, right? And the challenge we have is, we have a small group of people in this room who are, willing to buck the status quo a little bit. Most people in power don't want this, right? Because they're Google, they're Meta, they're Apple, they are trillion-dollar companies that are, making lots of money under the current system. Whether they're Chuck Schumer or they're Donald Trump or they're Eric Adams, whoever it is, same deal. And none of these are necessarily all bad people. They just are people who have power and are not going to want to give it up. So the reason to me this is all so important and why I'm putting some of my time and effort into this is really to recruit you guys. That's why I'm here, right? I need you guys and all of your friends to help me make the case for mobile voting, help me make the case for repealing Section 230, which is what will take away that liability protection and require internet companies to be a lot more responsible. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I invited all of you here. And I think now I get to introduce someone who's actually, one of you, and I do a good job. The thing that I'm not going to really do anything. I'm just good about talking about things and sounding really convincing. Skill set. But Avalon Fenster, who is an incredibly sort of influential and popular influencer, and works in AI, so she's smarter than you guys are. And she really dedicates herself to living her values, right? So it's one thing for me to stand here and talk about it, but she's doing it. So I don't know where she is, but as soon as she's there, you are. Come on up.
room, and I'll start off by explaining why I'm so excited to be in this room. And I think what it really is I think there's a real value in intergenerational organizing and collaboration. I think there's a lot to be said about young people leading the charge. There's a lot to be said about the movements that have been spearheaded by young people all over the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, and thousands of years. But I think there's also something to be said about the wisdom, experience, knowledge, connections, understanding of nuance that other generations have. And I'll say that I've kind of been all over the place in the last few years. I'm 21 years old. I've been at this since I was 12 years old. I'm a first generation American. And my start in activism in politics was when I was 12 years old. My mother was a part of the National Organization for Women in the local chapter. Very passionate feminist, very passionate on immigrants' rights. She's a Jewish refugee from Ukraine. And she brought me to this meeting of the National Organization for Women, and I was 12 years old. And I left the meeting, and I remember saying, Mom, I'm really glad that you brought me to that meeting, but I was the youngest person there by at least 4 decades. Besides you, like, a lot of these issues don't pertain to me. But at the same time, I really respect these women that I was with. And of course, I said it a little differently because I was 12 years old. But I remember that distinct feeling of, I have a different experience and I have a different worldview, but I could really benefit from the worldview of the people that have been at this, who are marching through the streets and fundamentally change the status quo for women so that I can live the life that I lead. And so I think when we're talking about the fundamental issues that impact my generation today, I think there's absolutely something to be said about young people leading the charge. Why I think that is because I'm a digital native. I grew up on media. I know the young people here remember the era of Tumblr and growing up on Instagram, and kind of everything you have is online. You don't really have privacy. When I look up my name, I see things from years and years and years ago. Pictures of me that I'd rather not have online, where I was, just a little, awkward 13-year-old girl. And I think that's something that we fundamentally understand because that's who we are and that's what we've grown up with. At the same time, when I was in high school, it was really, I think, the rise of Instagram memes. And in my first year of high school, a very close friend of mine was radicalized by the alt-right online through social media. And it completely changed my worldview. It changed my trajectory of what I was interested in and what I wanted to do with my life. And that person became very, very violent. And this happened before I even understood what a social media algorithm was. And now fast forward, I'm 21 years old, I'm at Barnard, I'm studying political science and science policy, I'm studying algorithms, I'm studying AI, that's what I'm working with. So I understand what happened to him more now, but I'm fundamentally just as disturbed by it now than I was then, even more so because I recognize it wasn't just him. It's an entire generation, and it's not just being radicalized into the alt-right, it's being forced into a depression. It's being forced into body dysmorphia. It's being forced into spaces on the internet that are otherwise harmful for you. But even if it's not happening at that extreme of a scale, we are still feeling fundamentally, my generation, socially isolated, even though we're more connected as a civilization than we've ever been before. And no one has really started inquiring until very recently as to why that is. And I think we have to make that inquiry, but we can't make that inquiry alone, because I wasn't there when the internet revolution happened. My parents were. I wasn't there for some of these major social movements that my grandparents were here for. They were. So while I have the understanding because I have a lived experience and I personally get it, and now I work on social media. Outside of the other work I do, I run a social media platform on Instagram and TikTok related to advancing the status of women all around the world through delivering early career information through technology and social media. And that comes after I've worked in social media for organizations, just as a young person giving advice on how to post on social media. But for the first time, I'm me online. And that has been a remarkably terrifying experience. I've experienced a lot of gender-based hate. I've experienced being doxxed. I've experienced having disinformation out there about me personally. And that's been really, really frightening. And so I want to say that I know that we can't do this alone, but I also encourage you to, if you're not a member of Gen Z, there's a few of us in here actually, that you listen to our perspectives, you understand where you're coming from, but you also understand that we can't do this alone. that we fundamentally can't just change the world because we have energy. If people could just change the world because they had energy, I think the world would look a little different. So I think what I want to just leave you with today and tonight, and as you're going about the rest of your week, is in general, I'm very excited about this movement, about this energy, and I think there's a lot that's been cultivating and building over the last few months around this issue. I know some of you may have watched the hearings that happened over the past few days related to algorithms and AI and all that stuff. But I think what the Sustainable Media Center is doing is really interesting. I think this is an issue that we really have to be paying attention to, not just because it impacts my generation, but it impacts all of our generations. It impacts the future of the world. It impacts your legacy. It impacts my legacy. So I really implore you just to think really critically about what you want your role in this to be and what skills you bring to the table. Because I think a lot of times there's sort of this idea that you have to be an expert in a particular topic to speak on a particular topic. There's people from all different industries, sectors, worldviews, life experiences in this room, and all of you have a lot to contribute to this particular argument. And I can't do it alone, my generation can't do it alone, policymakers can't do it alone. It's really going to require all hands on deck. So I'm incredibly excited to be part of this mission, both personally and also as part of the Sustainable Media Center. And I really implore you all to take this time to meet with people and talk a little bit and figure out what your piece of the pie is going to be in this, because I fundamentally believe that this is the most important issue facing not only my lifetime, but the future of human civilization. And so I know that's very weighty and that's very heavy, but I think we all have a little thing that we can do to be a part of the solution here, or just to be part of the reinvention of the wheel. So thank you so much, Steve, for having me as part of this mission, and thank you, Bradley, for having us in your space, and I'm really excited to see what the rest of the night looks like.
So, I'm a producer by training. You couldn't have booked two better guests back tonight. So, what I love about Bradley is that zero bullshit. This is the problem. We have to solve it. It's serious. I'm putting my money into it. And what I love about Avalon is that when she says this is the biggest problem of our time, that's not copy someone wrote for her. She feels it. And what you'll find when you talk to the Gen Z people in the room tonight is they all feel it. I mean, this is not a special thing. And when you talk to young people, their fears about the world are real. They're not just based on the age they are. They're not going to grow out of them, and they're genuine. That being said, when I look out on this beautiful night in New York, and I look at all of you, we all had other things we could have been doing tonight. We all had other invitations, or we could have gone out to dinner, we could have gone home and watched a movie, and we all made the decision. We had 30 people invited and 30 people showed up. That doesn't happen much. So you're all here for a reason. And you're here because somewhere in your gut, you know that there's nothing more important to do tonight than be here. When you look around the room and you get to introduce yourselves to each other, you'll find entrepreneurs, scholars, government people, students, graduate students, teachers, parents, grandparents. We've all got skin in the game. This is all our issue. And it's not going to be solved from the top down. It's not going to be solved from the bottom up. So the question is, what do we do? And it reminds me of a story. Person's walking down the street. They happen to have a cup of water in their hand, and they smell smoke. And they look a little further, and they see that their neighbor's house is on fire. And they run to the house. They stand there with the cup of water in their hand, and for a moment they think they're going to be heroic, and then they realize, shit, I've got a cup of water. The house is on fire. Theoretically, that should do some good, but it's not going to do some good. And they then feel, as we all have in this issue, for a moment, despondent. And so what I would ask all of you to think about is, what happens when the next neighbor shows up with a cup of water? And then the next neighbor shows up with a hose? And then the next neighbors show up with buckets? And then the fire truck is driven up by the other neighbor, and all of a sudden, there's all this water. And the house is on fire, and you're there as a community, as we are tonight. All of a sudden, you can put the fire out. So you've all got a cup of water, and you feel a little inadequate. Like, shit, I'm on TikTok, and I'm tweeting, and I'm making noise, and I'm making my issue known, but it feels a little like a cup of water against the fire. And you shouldn't, and some of you have different resources, some of you have millions of TikTok viewers, that's all great, but it's still versions of a cup of water. Some of you have economic resources, some of you have networks, but we're not gonna solve it with our cup of water. And so part of what I hope you'll do is, amongst yourselves, talk tonight about how your cup of water and someone else's cup of water actually add up to actions. And the other thing that you need to know about media companies, brands, advertisers, adults generally is they're terrified of you guys. Genuinely terrified. I mean, when I say to adults, how often have you talked to somebody that's 19 years old, 20 years old? They say, well, you know, I coach a team at the school. No, not you're in charge and they're listening obediently. Like an actual conversation. And they say, well, I have a teenage child. Like, well, that doesn't count. Because, I don't know, does everyone remember being 15? You all remember being 15? It's horrible. It's horrible. Your school is horrible, boyfriend and girlfriends are horrible, you know, classes are horrible, grades are horrible, college is horrible. It's all horrible. And it was horrible 10 years ago, and it's more horrible today. And so the idea that you're going to ask parents to either control their kids' media or talk to their kids about media or have some control of their kids' media lives is just absurd. I mean, I'll just be honest. When I was 15, I had a fondness. I've never said this in a room full of people. I was fond of explosives. Now, the harmless answer was I like Estes model rockets, but I also convinced a family member to buy me a pound of gunpowder. You know, teenagers do bad things.
It was your fire.
It was. Did you live in Long Island? My point is, this idea that we're going to ask parents to solve the problems of teen media is crazy. But collectively, I think adults can talk to young people. And I think young people can ask adults for help. And I think adults can say, hey, I know somebody there. And at the end of the day, as Bradley has taught me, and I think he's right, this is going to come down to economics. It's going to come down to how does the money flow? Who's getting paid enormous amounts of money to amplify hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, and how do we make them stop? And the answer is some we're going to ask nicely, and some we're going to ask less nicely. But we're going to make them stop, because this trajectory we're on is not acceptable. So with that, thank you all for being here. I'm incredibly excited that you're here. As you leave after dinner, and we've all had a chance to spend some time together, there's a sign by the door. We're going to have a pen by it. Please sign it, partly because it feels good, and partly because we like to see signatures on it. And with that, I'm going to hand the final brief talk of the evening back to Bradley to actually tell you what we're going to do. Thank you all.
So, 4 things I'm going to have to refer to my phone. We're supposed to have a slide. We need a slide. It didn't go up. So I memorized some of it while he was talking. But 4 things. The first is figure out what your generation thinks and feels and actually ask you for your opinion. And I know you express it to each other 24/7, but you know, in a way that adults are actually listening. In my world of politics, we call it focus groups, but it's fancier for this to justify. And then, you know, the second thing is really put together a real channel for you guys and for your generation that is linked into the whole adult world, that one that you were talking about, right? Into the government, into the media, into major tech corporations, into major companies, you know, major nonprofits, everything else, and so that we actually now have the ability to take your voice and millions and millions and millions and millions of people like you and force through repeal of Section 230, and force through things like real stuff, probably climate change, and guns, immigration, and education, all the other stuff, but none of that can happen until
was happy, so kind of trying to create that mechanism is kind of the second piece of this. And then third is expertise, which is, as Steve said, they like to blame parents for their kids' bad internet habits, but especially some of the two kids during COVID, like there was no distinction for you guys too between school and social life and everything else. They were just on it all the time. And so we're going to ask all the top academics and experts in the country to really put together a letter of their study saying this argument that it's not the platform's fault, it's the parents' fault is total bullshit. And just sort of take that out of the mix. And then the fourth would be fellowships for the SustainableMedia Foundation so that people can actually do all the work that we're talking about. So 1.5 is what you're looking for?
That's the number.
You're looking for 1.5. Everybody wants to volunteer. But think about the stuff that we said tonight. Talk to people at dinner, and if you